Namaskar and thank you for joining us here on our weekly program on geoeconomics. Today we'll put into context the election of Javier Milei as Argentina's president. The country, which has been in an economic crisis, has abandoned its left-wing history and has put in office a president who's promising shock therapy on the economy. Among his chainsaw policies are plans to abolish the central bank, dollarize the economy and significantly cut government spending. These policies risk losing economic autonomy, but they also open the economy to free market forces. To discuss the pros and cons of such a plan, we have with us two eminent guests. Let me introduce you to them. Dr. Suranjali Tandon is an economist with the National Institute of Public Finance and Policy, and she's an expert on international finance. And Dr. Aprajita Kashyap teaches Latin American Studies at the Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi and is an expert on Latin America. Thanks very much, ladies, for being with us. Dr. Tandon, can a country the size of Argentina just decide to close down its central bank and depend on an outside currency?
That's a good question, Mark. Actually, Argentina struggled with its own currency for a long time now. If you would say that there's been a de facto deal.
Oh. Right. We seem to be having a little problem with your connection, Dr. Tandon. So, go ahead, ma'am. Yeah.
Yeah, so just saying that it's difficult move for any country to get rid of the central bank. It would require hard choices on what would be the the effect on the economy. But as I've already mentioned, that there has been some degree of dollarization already. With people in the country holding dollars as well as using that for specific transactions.
Yes, indeed. So the people have already started abandoning the peso for the dollar. But Dr. Kashyap, what power would dollarizing give the U.S. over the Argentinian economy? Wouldn't the U.S. seem to have some undue influence then?
Yeah, Mark, you're right. Argentina will lose control over its monetary and fiscal policies. But having said that, the people in Argentina have already switched their money holdings from peso to dollar. Therefore, the fiscal cost of dollarization would be lesser, relatively low. And this is not the first time that Argentina has started pegging its currency to dollar, because they did this experiment earlier in 1991. Okay. So losing itself to United States would not be a question, but in the political game, Javier Milei seems closer to say Trump, and he's already made a visit. He's visited Washington. So in that sense, he's trying to come closer to United States. That's an obvious choice.
Okay, so he seems to be influenced by the policies of liberal policies, free market economy. But Dr. Tandon, is this a short-term measure, or would it have a long-term? Would it have long-term implications? I mean, has dollarization, for instance, helped other countries like Ecuador or Lebanon, which have tried it out?
No. So, Mark, if the country does decide to dollarize its way out of the current problems that it has, it's definitely going to have a long-term repercussion. It does in any country. But the success of it will vary, because it's not just a package that you move to a currency and it gives you stability. Now, even if you look at the experiences of countries like Greece, which sort of accepted the euro as their currency, the inherent instability or the fragility has to be dealt with. And I think unless Argentina addresses some of those concerns, moving to the dollar does not really, solve all the problems. And even in Ecuador's case, it was a full package of changes that were braced, which brought about the stability that we compare or refer to.
Okay, Dr. Kashyap, many of the Caribbean countries, they've pegged their currencies to the US dollar. So this has resulted in some form of stability in that region. But is that even possible for the Argentinian currency at this time, which is, at around 357 pesos to the dollar? Can it be pegged at this kind of, at this late stage?
I'm not an economist, but all I
Yeah.
can say is that the dollar is at its best, and this is, actually the right time for Argentina to peg its currency or adopt dollarization. So it has certain positive connotation
Okay.
because it's going to solve the inflation problem. But as I said earlier, Argentina will lose control on its monetary policy. So this
Yes.
currency is not something new which Argentina is trying. Interestingly, in this election, there were three candidates, and in the
Yes.
first round, and Sergio Massa, he had full faith in peso, so he wanted to make peso strong. There was a lady, Patricia Bullrich, who said she will have a dual economy. That means dollar and peso economy, which would be the ideal situation. So
Right.
Milei, having said, announced it in the election, but once he goes to implement it, there are going to be practical difficulties.
Indeed. Dr. Tandon, would you like to comment on the question of pegging the currency? I mean, we've seen that in the Caribbean countries, they've pegged it. Does that create, I mean, pegging is not, of course, dollarization. It's just like keeping a value which is relatively fixed to the dollar. We can't see that happening with the peso, especially with the policies of the leftist policies that have been followed over a period of time.
So it's difficult because once you start pegging the currency mark, you have
Hmm.
to be aware of the internal adjustments within the economy that will have to kick in to stabilize that value at the level that you choose. And Argentina's anyway had its fair share of high rate of inflation. Even if you look at their exchange rates, they have multiple exchange rates that operate within the economy. So where or which particular exchange rate will they pick as pegging
Okay.
it to at what level? And
Yeah.
then of course the big question is what do you do with monetary policy? So
Yes.
will what will happen to interest rates? Whether governments will be able to follow expansionary policy to deal with the internal adjustment process, which in case would kick in the case of pegging of the currency. All of those, I think, are questions that can only be answered if it's implemented. But I would say it's a note of caution on uh, first pegging the currency and second also moving to another currency, which is the dollar.
Okay, Dr. Tandon, the IMF says that inflation is largely the result of the government monetizing the fiscal deficit. So Milei's spending less is part of his plan to bring about some sort of fiscal consolidation. How effective is this going to be? Because at a time like this, actually, the country requires the government to step in and spend on infrastructure networks, to keep demand. It's, I mean, a classical Keynesian problem.
Yeah, it's a catch-22 mark. So if you
Yeah.
think about it, they have to rein in their fiscal deficit to be able to control the other macro variables. But at the same time, they need to win the confidence of its people, because even if you look at the current state of affairs, so for example, there are two ways to deal with the fiscal deficit. One is, of course, expenditure cut, and the other is rise in taxes. And what we've seen, at least in Argentina, is that the rise in taxes has caused some mobility of these taxpayers to other neighboring Latin American countries like the Uruguay. So I think it's a tough call, and I think that it'll have to be calibrated over the next few years. So this whole shock therapy can go either way, but as I would imagine, it's a small step at a time approach that the government will have to follow so as to not choke off the economy while trying to rein in inflation.
Dr. Kashyap, unemployment is officially at about 6.9%, but there's a large informal segment there, and also there are problems between the unions and the government. So when we analyze this vote, it's a vote that implies change. Is that a change in mindset, would you think? Because we're already seeing demonstrations on the streets. People are wanting better jobs, better pay.
Mark, this is not a problem of Argentina per se. Throughout Latin America, because they have been primary product exporting economies, and they have had this problem of investments. So during the 1980s, when they went through a lost decade, they then went in for structural adjustment programs, which were dictated by IMF and World Bank. So since then, because the level of industrialization, therefore the employment is going to remain a problem. And now one thing which I would like to bring in here is Millet has announced that he's going to cut ties with China. And Chinese investment in Argentina is huge, and especially in infrastructure segments. So the creation of jobs is a lot due to the Chinese projects that have been undertaken. Now, by saying that he's going to do away with Chinese relations, he's going to do away with Brazil, he's going to put off a regional trade grouping which is called Mercosur. If he's going to say that, then obviously the foreign direct investments are going to dry up. And because the extent of Chinese investment is very large. So if they pull out, that vacuum needs to be filled up, which will take some time. Therefore, this unemployment problem is going to proliferate, according to me.
Okay. Dr. Tandon, Millet has also, I mean, he entered politics just about 5 years ago. Perhaps, I mean, I can ask this question to Dr. Kashyap, since it's more about the politics. He's entered politics about 5 years ago. Would you, consider this a meteoric rise, or Argentina just having limited options?
Okay, very interesting question. He joined politics in 2021. He was a professor in economics. So if we look at both of them, Sergio Massa and Javier Milei, he was the finance minister. So he had training in economics, political training in economics. And Millet had a teaching experience, and he claims that he's an expert in economic restructuring. So having said that, the problem with Argentina was that these were populist governments, and they were just very pragmatic, very innovative. They were taking piecemeal efforts, and they were not able to club or put a cap to inflation. Despite that, in the first round, Sergio Massa wins. He's from the Peronist Party. And then people got so frustrated that for them, it was a choice. They had two choices. They either, they choose somebody who's already not able to put a cap on the inflation. He's already failed in clubbing because inflation was 140%.
Yes.
So then the people out of desperation, let us give chance to a new person. And this is more about hope in despair. So that something radical. That is why people voted for Millet.
So, Dr. Tandon, if we go back to monetary policy, I mean, how does the U.S. monetary policy, and we've seen that there have been a series of tightening measures, impact current countries that are, beginning to start relying on the dollar?
No, so I think, Mark, there's already a degree of reliance on countries that import capital. So, you see when US Fed starts raising rates, other countries see that their rates also go up in tandem. That
Right. Right. We seem to be having a bad connection with you, Dr. Tandon. I'll come back to you. But Dr. Kashyap, let me bring you in on another question then. India's G20 presidency had tackled many issues of debt restructuring. Has this not benefited Argentina, a member of the G20, as well as a member of the Global South?
Argentina had its own problems. Now it was going, so let me just give you a little bit of a background. So Argentina is the second largest economy in Latin America. And if we go back a history, Argentina, due to wealth of pampas, it ranked among the top 10 countries in per capita income indicators from late 19th century to the Great Economic Depression. So, if you look at Latin America, it has gone through ups and downs, but has managed to control its inflation. It has managed debt indebtedness. So Argentina is already aware, but the problem with these countries, Latin American countries, is that they pledge a lot of their budget on social safety nets. So if they allow in taxation also, there's a federal primacy in taxes. They they distribute the taxes. So, and they will not cut down on the social. And there are, very good examples of social safety programs. And, we in India also have taken them as role models. Like in Brazil, we have Bolsa Familia or Zero Fome program. So these kind of social safety networks, social safety net programs are very expensive. And because we have had Peronist government, which is a populist government,
Yes.
so for them to wind up these social safety networks is not an option. And that is why somebody like Millet is saying that he's going to wrap up some of these social safety net programs, but in practicality may quite be difficult. So restructuring has to be in the unique context of Argentina, and lessons from India, of course, they should be learning. They have already, privatized. They have allowed FDIs to come in. It was a success story till last 4 or 5 years. But Argentina again, and one common thing which we see in all the Latin American countries is the level of corruption. So there's a lot of pilferage of funds, and that is why they go through these periodic, dips in economic performances.
Okay, Dr. Tandon, I hope that, yeah, we've re-established a connection. So you were saying, Dr. Tandon, about the monetary policy of the US and how it impacts other countries. Now, especially after dollarization, these countries will be dependent, and the US is concerned about its own inflation issues and has been tightening for a reasonable period of time now.
Yes, so Mark, as I was saying that, there is some interlinkage between different economies on the monetary policy because of open capital accounts. But where a country just does adopt another currency, there is dependence, because at the end of the day, the supply and of the currency that is being used in the economy is determined elsewhere. And, of course, Argentina is thinking of something more extreme to say that they don't need a central bank. Of course, the autonomy of the central bank is lost when a different currency is used. But this would really tie the hands, even in terms of, whether a government is able to fund during the periods of crisis. So unless Argentina really opens its capital account and there receives large flush of funds into the economy, I don't see how this is going to help them in terms of retaining their autonomy on economic policy.
Okay, Dr. Kashyap, the G20 presidency now shifts to South American continent with Brazil taking over. Argentina, of course, is a neighbor. So do you see, a convergence on economic issues affecting the continent? Because, I mean, the situation is that, after all, this is one of the few free right-wing leaders who's come to power in that place.
It's very interesting because till recently, till this election, we were, when Lula had come to India, he had said that he will rope in the Mercosur as an observer group.
Okay.
So Mercosur includes Argentina, Paraguay, and Uruguay. Now, when Milei has been elected, he has outrightly said that he's going to have no relations with socialist countries. And he includes Cuba, Brazil in those countries. So now with this kind of an antagonism, when he says that he's not ready to have any kind of relationship, to expect that Argentina will help in hosting of the G20 summit, it's very, presumptive at this stage, because we cannot say how his
well, I was not saying help. I'm not saying that they're going to help in hosting. I'm saying that since the policies of the G20 would affect the whole continent, they would look for some sort of convergence with the countries of South America itself. But since these two countries, I mean, the largest countries, are definitely pulling in different directions, is that going to be possible?
It will be very difficult, as I said, because if Sergei Massa was the winner, it would have been possible, but with Milei at the helm, it is going to be difficult, because he also has said that he's going to take back Argentina's application for expansion of BRICS. And so that also is not a possibility. Therefore, it will be very, very difficult.
Dr. Tandon, if you have to look at this situation, I mean, which I've just raised about Brazil having had a leftist leader, Lula da Silva, back in power, Argentina, has a right-wing leader, and he sees things like climate change as a socialist lie. He's totally against socialism. Do you see, some sort of some serious disruption going to take place in the Latin American countries?
Mark, there's been a bit of a churning within Latin America, as we've seen. It's already been spoken of by the expert. But what I see in terms of climate change, I would mention that we're also seeing shifting of stances across developed countries, and as you may have read or observed, that Argentina is also looking to explore the expansion of fossil fuels within its economy because it wants to be self-reliant. So as I see, in terms of its vision of where the economy is headed, I think climate change might take a backseat in terms of the agenda that needs to be addressed.
Also, Dr. Tandon, there are certain sectors which the Argentine economy are good at. I mean, agro-industry, for one, is supposed to be an area where they have great advantages, comparative advantages. Do you see, possibilities of India working more closely with Argentina under this new administration? They will probably be allowing, foreign investment in.
So, Mark, as we already know, that China has a big presence in Argentina, and there's been already an investment flow there. So I would say that there's enough space that China's already taken within Argentina. In terms of cooperation, I think the biggest items that Argentina exports today are soy and corn. And I haven't looked at the trade numbers, but perhaps if there is a demand within the Indian economy, there might be some potential for synergies. But as I say, in terms of India's policy, it is to work within the G20, to work bilaterally with different countries to find a common ground. Insofar as Argentina's own priorities are concerned, I don't see tremendous intersection in terms of India's growth or outward-looking policies, as well as Argentina's immediate priorities.
Dr. Kashyap, Milei has already been to the United States. He hasn't met the leadership. He hasn't taken office. He's going to take office only on the 10th. So he's met with the administration at certain levels. He's also met with the IMF, and they've talked about various restructuring. Perhaps they've had a constructive discussion. That's what we hear. No outcomes as yet. How do you say, how much dependence would Argentina have now on the U.S. model, on institutions within the United States?
I'll just take you back to the 1990s when they started with the neoliberal programs. So during that program, there were at least 3 programs which were administered by the United States. So one was the Washington Consensus, second was the Baker Plan and Brady Plan. These were secretaries of state. So even at the time of the 1990s, when neoliberal reforms were undertaken, US was, intervening in Latin American economy through IMF. So United States is going to have a sizable role. One thing that I would like to say about India, the relationship that you talked about, that in Latin America, there is there's a cyclical process which goes on. So there's a rise of pink tide, there's an ebb of pink tide, then again a rise of the pink tide. So it's a cyclical process. So the left and right, they juggle power. Having said that, I'd like to also point out that despite, Bolsonaro, who was a right-wing president, gives way to Lula, despite our relationship with Brazil has continued. There's a continuum. So with Latin American countries, there's one good thing that India has always done, that it maintains a steady relationship. It is, I think it is the largest partner. India and Argentina are the 4th largest economic partners, trading partners. So it will continue in a positive direction.
Okay, a final word from you, Dr. Tandon.
And of course,
a final word from you, Dr. Tandon, is about Dr. Tandon, it's about the reserves. They don't have enough reserves, and they are talking about dollarization. I mean, you need to have some reserves, right, to be able to dollarize.
No, absolutely correct, Mark. So in order to make that transition, they need the source of the dollars. And I think the key part of the puzzle which has been spoken about is the capital account liberalization. So they need to further open their capital account to be able, to build back, to be able to make that transition.
Okay, we leave it there. Thank you very much, Dr. Suranjali Tandon, economist with the National Institute of Public Finance and Policy, and Dr. Aprajita Kashyap, who teaches Latin American Studies at JNU. Thank you very much for enlightening us on this subject. Now, Argentina has comparative advantage in the agro-industry sector, as we were saying. Competitiveness also in manufacturing and services. This has been adversely affected by the protectionist policies. And also Argentina, by all estimates, is contracting this year, mainly because of a drought. It is expected to pick up by around 2.8% in 2024, and this is according to the IMF and the World Bank. So in the natural course itself, it is receding currently, but it has the potential for the future looks bright. Thanks for watching. Namaskar.